The Formula One circus returns to Argentina after a 14-year break to a brand new circuit and unfortunately to some extremely inclement weather conditions. Hello and a very warm welcome from Ben Edwards and John Watson to Buenos Aires for Eurosport's live coverage of the first qualifying session on a day that has seen the rain falling since the very early hours of this morning. A new track to learn and some big puddles to contend with. It is not going to be an easy Argentine baptism for some of the drivers today.
And the man we were looking at in the garage, Damon Hill, was one of those men this morning. Just found out how slippery indeed this Buenos Aires, the revised circuit here, is. He went off within about 4 laps, I think, this morning. His car spun over one of the slowest sections of circuit, but the bottom of the car hit the curb, so they had to take the car in and spend all the morning session repairing it. And in fact, Damon Hill just missed getting out onto the track for 1 lap by about 5 seconds. But there you see a Ferrari on the circuit. Conditions really appalling, and that man Jean Alesi was the man who ended up in fact being quickest of all. The time that he attained this morning, and it depended really when you're on the circuit as to what track conditions were like, but the time was 1 minute 58.207, so that's the benchmark that Alesi is going to be looking for in this 1 hour of qualification.
These are our first pictures, our first chance to see this brand new circuit here at Buenos Aires, a very, very different circuit to the one that was used for Formula One racing when they were here 14 years ago.
Well, I hate to sound like an old man saying in the good old days the racetracks were better racetracks, but one thing is for sure, that this Buenos Aires racetrack, the one that was used up until 1981, was one of the best racetracks in the world. And when I came here on Wednesday, I was disappointed to see the layout. It is just so tight. It's reminiscent in many ways of a giant go-kart track rather than a Grand Prix track. And in particular, the one corner that has been named after the late and great Ayrton Senna is not a corner that should have his name. It is really the slowest corner on the circuit, and it's a corner that has been catching out many people over these 2 days of unofficial running.
Jean Alesi is coming round to complete his first lap of qualifying, a tight right-hander, which leads on to the start-finish straight, but there's quite a tricky left-hander to get through first.
Well, this is the corner where we've seen a lot of incident here over 2 days, but Jean Alesi consistently looks the most comfortable and the quickest through this corner. Now, he seems to know which part of the road works best for him in the Ferrari, but looking at other people with Ligier this morning, Olivier Panis, he, for the second time in 2 days, barely got a lap completed before he repeated what he did on Thursday when he stuck the car into the pit wall, just short, in fact, of the Williams-Renault team. This morning's incident was a more serious one, and of course, with the depleted spares that Ligier have, plus some spare parts that have got lost in transit, they are basically down to 2 cars before the event really has got underway.
The weather conditions certainly haven't improved a lot during the day. The rain not coming down as heavily now as it was earlier. We've seen lightning and thunder all the way through the morning. Weather conditions for tomorrow are not forecast to be that good either. I have to say, though, that the good news is that at least Sunday is due to be a little better.
The big problem, of course, is that on Thursday, when we had 2 separate sessions, acclimatization sessions for teams on this brand new Argentine circuit, there was little dry running. Thursday morning started damp, and it ended up getting more or less dry, enough to put on a set of race slicks. But the problem was the circuit itself was very, very slippery because it was a brand new circuit, still very dirty. There is no knowledge of this racetrack in real dry conditions, and not one driver out there has ever been to Argentina before either.
The time that Jean Alesi set this morning to set the fastest time in the free practice was a 1 minute 58.207. The conditions fairly similar, John, to how they were this morning, so I would guess that we would imagine to see similar times.
Well, similar or not, the conditions are very, very difficult indeed. Alesi mastered the wet weather conditions throughout the morning. He appears to be very much in the same mode right now. This is the corner leading on to start-finish straight that has been a real problem corner. Panis's Ligier literally just turned sharp right into that wall. And he's going to go on and improve that time.
Let's just quickly look at the times from that free practice as we see David Coulthard coming out onto the circuit now for the first time in this first qualifying session. Heinz Harald Frentzen was second fastest in the Sauber Ford. Third fastest was Eddie Irvine. Fourth fastest, Michael Schumacher. Then fifth, David Coulthard. And sixth, Rubens Barrichello. 7th, Mika Hakkinen. 8th was Mika Salo. 9th, the other Ferrari of Gerhard Berger. And in a surprising 10th place was Jos Verstappen in the Simtek Ford.
And, I mean, Simtek needs something to cheer themselves up. They had a miserable time in Brazil, and really they are here with a bare minimum of equipment, and that 10th place from Verstappen certainly cheered them up, although Verstappen's race car had an engine problem, and he had to do that time in the car of Domenico Schitarella. But another little point that was made, I think it might have been even by Ben Edwards himself, was that Frentzen and Irvine, familiar conditions for them, because they spent something like 3 years in Japan in Formula 3000, where they were accustomed to having wet races, wet practices, wet tests. They were totally at ease, and Frentzen and the Sauber looked massively better than we saw them in Brazil.
Pierluigi Martini getting ready to go out for his first qualifying session, and in fact celebrating 10 years to the day of his Grand Prix debut, and in fact the Grand Prix debut of the Minardi team. Well, just look at how difficult these conditions are. David Coulthard very nearly getting himself into trouble there, and the car's really snapping around on this circuit.
Yeah, what's happening, that's the exit of the new Senna chicane, and there's a little dip there, and that dip's filling up with water, and if you get the right rear or right front in that, it just drags the car sideways, gives you a heart-stopping moment, and of course that's the point of the circuit where Damon Hill, with teammate to Coulthard, lost control of his car this morning. So it's a part of the circuit where you've got to be really, really careful.
Good overhead shot as he goes on to his first proper timed lap now. Except again, you can just see the amount that the car is moving about. There's a lot of water around. Not too many big standing puddles, 1 or 2 puddles on the apexes, but Coulthard's car, you can really see it fighting for grip as he accelerates down the next straight into a sweeping left, but generally most of the corners are either 2nd or 3rd gear.
Really, it's a circuit where you never really let the car flow. It never gets a run. Now, the old circuit, that was wonderful, but you really allowed the car lots of time in 6th gear or 5th gear in those days, and lots of full throttle. Here it's off and on, stop, go, demanding of physical and mental concentration, and it's going to be a very tough race. 72 laps, whatever the conditions here, very tough. Jean Alesi, by the way, has improved by about, just under a second. He's now 1 minute 57.664, still by far almost 10 seconds quickest man on the circuit.
We've only seen a few times recorded so far. Bertrand Gachot actually has the 2nd fastest time at the moment. David Coulthard is the man who's certainly going to challenge Alesi's time. We saw he was up on the split time, so let's just watch the rest of this lap to see whether he can further improve on that. Coulthard certainly saying himself yesterday that it reminded him of a kart circuit. Very, very tight and twisty section that he's into here. And the car once again just hitting that dip, hitting the puddle and moving around a lot. Up to the last tight corner before they accelerate and then take that sweeping left onto the start-finish straights is definitely one of the trickiest parts of the circuit. And we wait for him to cross. Again, you can see as he goes through that left-hander just how difficult it is.
Well, a big improvement for David Coulthard, 1 minute 58.785, just 1.1 seconds slower than the master this weekend in the rain in Buenos Aires. That's Jean Alesi. Alesi going on that 4th lap, some 0.2 of a second slower than his current fastest lap. Coulthard still continuing around the circuit. But there's the car, not the driver, but the car, which was very, I would say the most impressive, and that also the Jordan with the Barrichello in the car, but Eddie Irvine this morning in his Jordan Peugeot, and Heinz Harald Frentzen in the Sauber with the factory Ford Z-Tech engine. The first time we've seen a strong performance from the Sauber team with Ford power, and big change really was in the shock absorbers. They discovered a problem with the shock absorbers after Argentina, and whatever the problem was, the car looked and certainly felt to the drivers just about undrivable. But here, through Thursday and Friday morning, a very impressive change for Sauber Ford.
Well, certainly watching out on the circuit earlier on, one thing you could notice a little bit about the Sauber Ford as Frentzen was driving it was just how tractable it seemed just listening to it. We were listening to the Ferraris, you could hear the peakiness of the engine. Suddenly it sort of comes on cam and they get wheel spin, whereas with Frentzen it seemed much more drivable.
Well, I think the strength that Ford have had over the last couple of seasons now with the Z-Tech engine is that it's got a lot of meat in the mid-range, but it's also very progressive and drivable, where Ferrari with this staccato V12 revving to something like 17,000 RPM, it's all or nothing, it's a switch. So it's very, very tricky indeed. And I think that makes the performance that we have seen from Jean Alesi this morning all the more credible. It also augurs very well for the performance of the Ferrari chassis, which we have given great compliments to from Brazil.
David Coulthard continuing around on another lap to see whether he can improve any further. Let's see, 58.785, 59.790. So no improvement on that lap for David Coulthard. He still lies second fastest with Gerhard Berger, third fastest now in the Ferrari. Bertrand Gachot still has the fourth fastest time in the Pacific Ford, and a few more drivers out onto the circuit. We've already seen Rubens Barrichello. Damon Hill has been out, or is out at the moment, but is about to go on for his first time lap. And there we can see the McLaren Mercedes of Mika Hakkinen, another man who was going well yesterday in the wet session, the wet test session that they had during Thursday.
Well, one thing about Mika Hakkinen, he doesn't lack courage. He was coming past our commentary position just at that very critical left sweep onto the pit straight, and believe me, the guy is brave. And there's trouble for one of the Simtex, pulling off or sliding off, we're not quite sure. And again, just look how difficult it is. Under braking is Damon Hill, and, well, that's it all over for Damon Hill. Unless he can get that engine running, he will be out of this qualifying session. Well, Damon has completed one lap. That was his second lap. So drama and there again, problems for the Ligier Mugen Honda team. This time, Oguri Suzuki has beached his car. A lot of troubles this weekend for Ligier, principally from within the cockpit rather than mechanical. Well, we've seen Martin Bundle behind us here, by the way, just stuck his thumb up at that, because he wants to be in the cockpit of this car and is desperate to be driving the car that currently Oguri Suzuki is in. And, well, we're going to speak to Martin a little bit later in the session. And the first question we're going to ask him, the one he will not be able to give us an answer, is when are you going to be in the cockpit? But that'll come a little bit later in the session. So cars all around the circuit, Ben, and they're going to have to probably red flag the session at some point if any more get stuck, because these cars are stuck at critical points. Those are the points if other cars get into trouble that you're liable to see a big problem. So I think it will not be very long before the cars currently out on the circuit will be seeing a red flag. There you see, that is the Ligier of Suzuki. And again, as a point, that's where this man went off this morning. Rubens Barrichello at the end of the pit straight just caught one of those puddles under braking, and it just dragged the car off and into that gravel bed.
We're seeing a few more cars come out onto the circuit now, but as you can see, conditions very difficult. Barrichello moves himself up into third position with that 59.925. But as you saw from the classification a few moments ago, the spread in times is huge at the moment, with only a few drivers actually stringing together a couple of fast laps. Remember, they still have the same limitation in terms of number of laps. Even though it's a wet session, still 12 laps is the maximum number that they can do throughout the session, and maybe some of them waiting to see whether conditions get any better.
Well, just looking outside the booth, rain is again falling very heavily, so the prospect of any improvement in track conditions, in my mind, is going by the second. When this session started, we're some 15 minutes into the session, and the red flag is out, and again, I say a leisurely decision. I mean, I sometimes express concern that the length of time, when it's to us clear in the commentary booth that there are problems on the circuit, to bring this red flag out. Now, I know that this decision has to go through a process, but with Suzuki's car stuck in the circuit, Damon Hill at the opposite end of the circuit, and really the whole session, there's nothing to be gained to let it continue, and a lot more to be lost. Commentary position, you could see that laser beam penetrating the spray, so from certainly above you could see it. Now it looks to me as if the beam is too sharp an angle. It needs to be a softer angle to allow the car that is following, say 50 or so meters behind, to see where that light is. But there's a needle point laser beam. It's being tested. It may become a part of the mandatory kit on a Grand Prix car. Interesting to watch if we see Irvine out in this session, if it's still fitted to his car, because it's quite distinctive, and it may well help drivers in the future who are driving completely blind in these conditions as to where a car that is ahead of them in effect roughly is.
Well, lasers seem to be the talk of the weekend at the moment. A fairly amazing laser show was given by McLaren at yesterday's press conference in the afternoon. and certainly impressed quite a few of the journalists there, I think. Obviously a very important marketplace for Mercedes and McLaren, and Mercedes, of course, great background in Argentina with their support of the great Juan Manuel Fangio, 5 times world champion, who sadly, John, isn't going to be around this weekend.
I think it's a great shame, but Juan Manuel Fangio has been unwell for some time, and everybody in Formula One would love to see him here over the weekend, and I know that everybody who has watched motor racing through the decades would, I think, hold Mr. Fangio as, well, it's this argument about who is the greatest driver, and Fangio certainly is amongst the greatest of the greats, and sadly not to be here this weekend, but I'm sure he will be sitting at home watching on screen and maybe disappointed with the conditions, because normally in Argentina over the previous years we used to have conditions which were the opposite to this, boiling hot. The problem was more dehydration than hydration that we have seen over the last 24 hours.
Taking a look here at Domenico Schiattarella, the man from Milan, who is taking part in this second Grand Prix of the year and hoping for better things than from the first event. Remember, he had a crash during qualifying in the Simtech, and it really was a very tough weekend for the team that had only just managed to get the cars to the circuit at all. It was their first running at all of any sort in Brazil, and here, thankfully, things are going a little better for them.
Well, not only is Schiattarella out, but Verstappen, his teammate, is out. Rubens Barrichello and Luca Badoer in the Minardi Ford with a high wing, an additional wing ahead of the main wing. We again wait to get that car on picture. So they see, in fact, looking across the circuit, one of the two Simtecs has gone down the escape road on the approach into the Senna chicane. And that's an area where Gerhard Berger this morning came to stop. Jean Alesi then went out at the very end of the session, in fact made an error at that part of the track. Fortunately, and there, in fact, look, you can see that's Luca Badoer and that additional rear wing above the main structure for no benefit whatsoever. That spin, once the pendulum effect took over, that car was out of control.
Taking a look now at Rubens Barrichello in the Jordan Peugeot, a team that had a very, very difficult Brazilian Grand Prix, and both cars going out of the race within 2 laps of one another. Things going better already here this weekend. The car seems to be handling better, and of course we're not seeing the same sort of bumpiness to the track surface that we saw a couple of weeks ago.
Brazil really was a big problem, and in particular for the Jordan team, and the majority of their testing had been carried out in Estoril, and the majority of that testing had been primarily of an engine nature, and Gary Anderson was quite emphatic in pointing out that really they've only begun to scratch the surface of the potential of this Jordan chassis, and they've got a big test coming up in a few days of returning from Argentina, and they're going to stay on and do another intensive test the week following the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola. So a lot of work, not just of an engine variety, but really trying to drag out more performance from the mechanical side, and therefore whatever the effects would be on aerodynamics for Rubens Barrichello and Eddie Irvine. And at that intermediate point, Barrichello marginally quicker than Jean Alesi. So we look now to see what happens at that second intermediate point. The problem in these sessions, Ben, of course, is that there's such little consistency between one lap and another. Alesi, his time was set very early in this session. We've now had a long gap while the track was cleared up and cleaned up, cars brought in. So we don't know what the conditions, how they would compare with how we saw them at that start of the session.
Barrichello slower on the second intermediate point, and in fact going off at that again on the approach to the Senna chicane. Very hard braking required there. It's such a tight corner. Well, he's able to apparently drive straight over the gravel trap and rejoin onto the circuit. He has rejoined. He should be able to come back, and that in fact is Johnny Herbert. Yeah, Johnny Herbert finding again, as he found this morning, just how treacherous the circuit is. Johnny Herbert and Damon Hill were out very early in that session. They found problems, and here again, look, you can see same familiar problem. Too much front brake, and nothing you can do. If you keep your foot on the brake's locked, you go straight on, you have no steering. You lift off, you're going too quick, you're not going to make the corner. It's a choice that's very, very difficult to make, and Johnny made it. He's, I think, gotten away with it. In the meantime, teammate Michael Schumacher
who was giving his Renault engine lots of throttle in this morning's session, getting lots of wheel spin as a consequence.
Schumacher, first time that he's got a chance to set a time in this session. We didn't see him out in the earlier part. Still the same situation with Jean Alesi fastest, David Coulthard second, and Rubens Barrichello third. Luca Badoa has come up into fifth position, and some 3 seconds, just under 3 seconds, slower than Jean Alesi at this point.
There'll be a point on the track when the wets are working at their best. They do need a certain amount of water. They're a cold running compound. Obviously you don't want standing water, but as soon as the circuit dries just a little bit too much in any way, you start actually losing grip. So I'm sure there'll be a sweet point sometime through this session.
Taking a look again at Michael Schumacher to see what sort of times that he can establish in this part of the session. Of course, all of the teams working hard. They've only had a chance to set the cars up for the wet so far this weekend. That little bit of dry running, well, it wasn't even dry in Thursday morning, where the track was very, very slippery. They were on slick tyres, but they really haven't had any chance yet to develop the setup of the car for this circuit if it is going to be dry on Sunday. Look at Schumacher sliding again on the exit of that chicane.
Well, he's just trying to get as much power down to the track as possible, but again, it's that exit out of the centre chicane where there is a pretty sharp dip or compression, and again with a little bit of water lying there, just kicks the back of the car out at the same point as you're getting on the throttle.
Onto a time lap, and it looks as though we're going to stay with the reigning world champion on this lap. A chance for us to have a look at the complete circuit and just look at the amount of standing water as he goes into the first corner.
You really have to be off the brakes at the point of hitting that to have the control of the car. You want to be back on the throttle. In these conditions, and driving a Grand Prix car is as far removed from what it's like in the dry. You do everything with, I mean, not at half speed, it's like at about an eighth of the speed. You must not try and nail the brakes. You must not try and nail the throttle, because all you will do is create problems which will make you go slower, and more than likely, as they are right now, end up in the gravel bed.
Michael Schumacher approaching that first checkpoint. He's on to one of the longest straights on the circuit, and coming up to the fastest corner on the track. It's a long sweeping right-hander, a couple of bumps just as they turn in there, which was putting the drivers off a little bit in the slightly drier test session yesterday. Now under braking and just squeezing past Pedro Diniz in the 40 Ford. Diniz getting out of his way, and Schumacher not really held up there, I think.
No, I think Diniz did a very good job, whether he knew a car was there or not, but give him credit for getting out of the way. Many drivers of more experience would have just serenely turned into the corner, and that would have destroyed a lap from Schumacher, which is certainly going to be consistent enough to put him onto the, at the minute, looking for second, third, fourth quickest. Still Alesi with that time set very early in the session, 1 minute 57.647. David Coulthard currently second quickest, Rubens Barrichello third, Heinz Harald Frentzen in fourth.
Coming up to the tight right-hander before he heads back towards the start-finish line, 57.647. And again, trying to get the power down. The wheels just spinning as he tries to get the power of the Renault through. Well, 58.832, it puts him third fastest, just behind David Coulthard. And he goes on to another lap. Another chance, perhaps, to improve on that.
And, I mean, Schumacher certainly lost time when he was passing Diniz, because he wouldn't have been entirely sure whether the 40 Ford would have seen him or not, so he would have been a little bit apprehensive. He would have certainly shown his nose, but that would have taken off maybe half a second. And getting a clear lap is going to be the key here at any point in the remaining moments or minutes of this session.
Now here's a man we must keep an eye on. Heinz Harald Frentzen, very impressive in this morning's free practice. Let's see what sort of time he can achieve straight away. Well, he already goes second fastest, a 58.356. That puts him 7/10 of a second behind Jean Alesi. But this man is really going well here so far this weekend.
Well, so is the Sauber chassis and the Ford Z-Tech-R engine, and many drivers would love to have the balance, if you like, that Ford engine provides. It may not be the most powerful, but it's got some qualities which really make driving a Grand Prix car enjoyable. And in these conditions, again, that's what you look for. You look for something that is sympathetic and harmonious to you. And Frentzen has been dragging a performance from the Sauber, one that probably not many people would have believed possible here, having watched what they did in Brazil a fortnight ago.
It is a complete reversal in fortune for Sauber at the moment, at least during what we've seen here in Argentina. They had a miserable weekend in Brazil, really not achieving anything except finding a car that was completely undrivable over the bumps. But certainly here in Argentina, it seems to be suiting the car better, and the team has done a lot of work to improve it. Well, we're watching Michael Schumacher again, coming round to complete his next flying lap, currently fourth fastest. Let's see, well,
he's found another 44. He's got Roberto Moreno this time. And again, a problem, losing time, back up to second place, only 0.2 of a second away from Jean Alesi. Again, had that car not been there, I would have said Schumacher would have claimed provisional pole, because again, not knowing what that car was going to do, even if he knew that Schumacher was there, that's just being clever, being intelligent. Oh, and Schumacher, too much right foot, Michael, and that almost could have seen your car in the barrier on the right-hand side of the circuit, and your session finished. But the skill and the reactions of Schumacher, I think, were quite amazing. Martin Brundle, you were a teammate to Michael Schumacher in his earlier days with the Benetton team. Now, in those days, Michael was plenty fast, but probably a lot wilder than he is now. But that type of driving from Schumacher, as a teammate, how did you live with it?
Well, the guy's got cat-like reactions, unfortunately. As you saw then, the car started to get away from him. He was just so quick to pick it up and do exactly the right amount of movement on the steering wheel, and not to panic with the pedals, and he kept it all together, because that could so easily have ended up in the barrier. But he's really pushing that car around. He seems confident on the throttle pedal. When you're catching slower cars today, it's very, very difficult for them. There's just a ball of spray behind you, and your mirrors are absolutely useless.
Now, one thing we've watched with Schumacher over the years is that he seems to be able to drag a performance out of that Benetton chassis in a way that it's been very difficult for teammates in previous years to emulate. What is it about Schumacher? Is it just that he's blindingly fast, or has he got a sense, like a cat-like sense that you mentioned in his reactions, or just all those combinations?
Well, he does like a car that handles a bit go-kart-like. He's got a great tradition in go-kart racing, of course, and that doesn't always suit other people's styles, particularly, as you can see, in these running wide, he blocked a brake on the way in, but it won't bother him. He'll just get straight back on it again. And you know, he does seem to like the car loose and moving around, and that doesn't always suit people at 150 miles an hour, whatever.
One of the things we watched last year when Johnny Herbert joined Michael Schumacher was that in comparison to Schumacher, Johnny was using a lot more steering effort. You could see the wheel moving a great deal more. Does that have an effect on that car? Or is it a car that is really designed and set up around Schumacher?
Well, Schumacher's a very strong player in the team, of course, but because of his results and because of his very confident manner out of the car. Now, he will have learned to ignore probably 90% of the things that's going on. You know, you've got 3 contact points with the car, your hands on the wheel, your backside in the seat, and your feet on the pedals. And you learn to ignore the most of the information, and he reacts very quickly to the important bits.
Well, Luigi Martini making his way back to the pits. The long walk back was his Minardi Ford well and truly beached in that gravel bed. As we once again see Gerhard Berger, the provisional winner from the Brazil Grand Prix 2 weekends ago. And Berger about to pick up for the start of a lap, and being very careful as he came round that slow second gear right-hand corner, lining himself up as opposed to trying to complete a lap where he would probably have exited the corner slightly differently. And let's hope we can watch this lap from Gerhard Berger, because a man of great experience and many victories, and a fair bit of sense, I would say, these days within a Formula One car. There's what happened. Nose chopped up. Carl Wendlinger did not see Pierluigi Martini, and Martini, I would think, rather rash in thinking he was going to be in a position to take or put his car ahead of the Sauber Ford. So probably I would say more fault lay with Pierluigi Martini and being too impatient.
Rubens Barrichello coming round for another lap. He currently lies third fastest. Schumacher, though, has just gone fastest. Haven't seen him in the picture, but Schumacher has just set the fastest time. So ignore that caption. Oh, no, you don't ignore the caption, because Barrichello has just gone fastest himself. They've just both taken the fastest time, 56.746 for Barrichello, and 0.3 behind that now is Michael Schumacher.
A great performance from the young Brazilian. who didn't have a particularly good Brazilian Grand Prix. He ended up in the gravel bed here this morning. He was in the gravel beds, in fact, even yesterday. And they're one of the two Ferraris, and that is Gerhard Berger, who has not gotten very far. And unlike his teammate, who really has been the master of the conditions throughout the weekend, Berger again into the gravel. He was there this morning. He's back into it this afternoon.
Rubens Barrichello has done 8 of his allocation of 12 laps, whereas Michael Schumacher's only done 5. So that perhaps gives him the advantage in terms of laps to go. Alesi there, you can see third fastest, then Frentzen, Coulthard and Badoa, which is an impressive performance as well.
Eddie Irvine, a man who only did a few laps this morning in the rain, straight out of the box, was fastest. And I wonder, has that performance gingered up Rubens Barrichello, because the competition between these two drivers is very intense. And for Rubens Barrichello, it's the first time he's had a teammate in his 3 years at Jordan who has really extended this young Brazilian. And of course, it's great for the team. They love to have two young lions who are pushing each other along and dragging the best out of the team.
Rubens Barrichello had 1 pole position last year, of course, and that was in damp conditions, although slightly different in that situation in that he was one of the few drivers to go onto slick tyres at the end of the session. Nevertheless, it gave him his first ever pole position, and currently he lies fastest here.
Well, I think there's little chance of anybody looking at slicks. The water on the circuit and the time remaining is incompatible, but a very good effort indeed by Rubens Barrichello, and he will come back and be delighted with that performance. And if you like, the re-establishment of his position. There's Gerhard Berger getting it wrong. This is the corner we've seen many people go off. That's where Pierluigi Martini ended up off the track a few moments ago when he tried to get past Carl Denlinger. So Ferrari and the Minardi, there we look at Eddie Irvine saying what his response to his teammate is going to be. And if it follows what he did this morning, it should be impressive.
This is Eddie Irvine's first time lap. He has not yet recorded a time, so this is an important one. Obviously one here where he's basically trying to get a time in the bank. The last thing he wants to do here is to throw it away on his first time lap. So we would perhaps expect to see a little bit of caution, and yet he knows that Barrichello, his teammate, has now gone fastest, and he's going to want to rise to that challenge.
But the thing is that Irvine's confidence from this morning is high. He's comfortable. He likes the conditions. He had a good time in those conditions. So therefore, as a result of that, you think, well, I don't mind driving in the rain. It's only when you have a big, scary moment that you say, well, things are not quite right, or I have a problem with the car or whatever. Irvine, confidence high, car looks good, he looks good. So we have to wait and see. What is Irvine going to do? This is the return. This is the slowest part of the circuit. The series of wiggles. This, in fact, is a part of the original Grand Prix circuit. So when the car finally exits on this straight used to go further, and it went into a part of the circuit known as the toboggan. It was a very quick downhill left and right, but because it was considered too quick for the current cars, it was no longer. Now, there's a red light was on around the circuit. I'm not quite sure why, whether the marshals were just testing it out to make sure it works, or whether there is a problem, but there are waved yellow flags down at that corner. We just saw Irvine coming through, and we can't quite see from our booth whether there is a red light around the circuit or whether it just applies to that one particular corner.
Here comes Eddie Irvine to complete his first time lap, and that a good effort. He's gone third fastest on his first time lap. He's 0.8 of a second down on teammate Barrichello, but that's really a perfect way to get into the rhythm now.
Great shot. You could see right into the visor, into the eyes of Irvine. And in fact, when he came out of the car this morning, there, Gerhard Berger's car being dragged away, and Berger not particularly happy about the muscle. Now, there is an unlocking device that should allow the car to be put into neutral, and Berger does not seem to have activated that, and that is part of the trouble dragging that car away. The rear wheels were still locked.
Rubens Barrichello, the man watching the time screens now to see if anyone can improve, and there is Damon Hill back out onto the circuit, the man who went off earlier on in the session, remember. Well, he's come back out onto the circuit at the moment. He hasn't recorded a time effectively, so he'll be coming round to start off what is for him a very important qualifying session. Remember, he had pole position in Brazil. He put in a superb performance on the Friday qualifying, but these conditions somewhat different to that.
Martin Brundle in the booth with us here. And Martin, last year you enjoyed Renault Power, that V10 engine in 3.5 litre form. What are the qualities of that Renault engine? We keep saying it's the best engine in Formula One, but you have driven the engine for a season. What do Renault do so well?
I drove it in '93 with Ligier, as you say, John, and they really have got every aspect of the engine together with regard to the power, the drivability, the reliability. Gives you plenty of time on the track, and that'll be paying dividends today. But I do believe other manufacturers are really closing that gap quite quickly.
Well, looking to see at that intermediate point how much Damon Hill has made an impression on Rubens Barrichello. And 50.7 is the gap, or the time. Okay. Well, yes, just under a tenth of a second faster. So, and Eddie Irvine, looking at the screen, in fact, is now the quickest man in this qualifying session on Friday afternoon. Eddie Irvine has gone a tenth of a second faster than his teammate, Rubens Barrichello. So, at this stage, Jordan have two cars on the front row.
It's been a difficult 2 days for Damon. He appears to have had a lot of problems, and this will be classy stuff if he can just turn out now and put a quick lap in. I assume he's still in his own car. I assume they've allowed him back out since the session was red flagged. If not, he would be entitled to go out in Coulthard's car anyway. But I can only assume this is his car, and he looks like he's really on it.
Well, again, maintaining that slight advantage over Irvine at the second intermediate point, and Damon, who drove a sublime Grand Prix in Brazil until he had that mechanical failure, and really, to me, he had the Grand Prix in Brazil very much in his control, and a sudden shock and disappointment to find himself spinning out of that race. And Frank Williams, has there been an improvement? He lost it in that last segment. He lost over 0.3 of a second. Now, Damon, of course, that's only his third lap. Irvine, well, in fact, Irvine's time was completed on his third lap as well. So, strong performance from both the Jordan drivers. Damon Hill, of course, has had less time on the track overall today than the two Jordan drivers. And we have to wait and see what Damon will do on this lap.
Eddie Irvine currently heads the list ahead of Rubens Barrichello. It's a Jordan Peugeot 1-2 at the moment in this first qualifying session. Damon Hill is third fastest. The man we're looking at now, Michael Schumacher, retains a fourth position. Jean Alesi, our early session fastest time holder, as we see Taki Inoue's car off at another part of the circuit. Well, Alesi now fifth. Sixth is Frentzen, and seventh fastest is Gianni Morbidelli. Eighth fastest, David Coulthard, who we haven't seen much more of, and there we can see the spin from Taki Inoue.
Interesting, we haven't seen too many people and Morbidelli again, I thought very impressive indeed. Again, you see that car in a very difficult part of the circuit. The marshals unable to move it to safety. Morbidelli comes round on a flying lap. Now there will have been, or the red flag has been put out for the second time, and I think very wisely indeed, because that was a dangerous moment. Morbidelli did not, in fact, slow down as he ought to have done. There should have been waved yellow flags at that part of the circuit, and he may well be brought in for a little bit of an interview with the race director, Mr. Jean Korschmidt, who is not known to be a lenient man.
To this first qualifying session.
And Ben, the gamble is going to be, do you go out now when the track conditions certainly have improved on how they've been since the start of this session, or do you wait as long as possible for the track conditions to improve even further? And that's a real, gambler's choice, and one that Mika Hakkinen clearly is prepared to go out and take advantage of the clear track. Hakkinen all the way down in 11th place, only completed 2 laps He's got 9 flying laps remaining. So Mika, first man out onto the circuit, and I think we should watch this very carefully indeed. He's on stickered tyres, which are brand new wet weather tyres. There is no limitation on the use of wet tyres, as is the case in fact now with slick tyres as well. And when those tyres are new, the edges of the treads are nice and sharp and crisp, and that helps cut through the water, helps give you grip, and that will remain like that for probably 2 or 3 laps until those edges get a little bit dulled, and then the tyre will begin to stabilise.
Mika Hakkinen set the fastest time in yesterday's wet session. He was only just ahead of Heinz Harald Frentzen, but it was the fastest time in that session, and that will have given him a lot of confidence, I think. And he's certainly looking forward to this track. Said it was quite a challenging track in the press conference yesterday, and he was enjoying the fact that it requires a lot of concentration, quite technical with these slow corners to deal with, but certainly looks as though he was relishing the opportunity to get his teeth into it.
Well, let's see what Mr. Hakkinen can do here now, because he's got a track all to himself. No one else has ventured out to date. Hakkinen coming up to just past the midway stage, and a very important outlap, because he will want to get a feel as quickly as possible to take advantage of the tyre, the freshness of the tyre, to ensure that when he gets that clear lap, he's going to be best placed to take advantage. Martin, what do you reckon that Hakkinen will try and do on this first flying lap he's about to commence?
Well, the tyres are warmed in the warmers before you get out. Not too hot, because as I said earlier, it's a cold running rubber compound. But tyre pressure is absolutely critical here. You want the tyre pressure to be absolutely right at the same time, as you said, John, before the edge of the tyre goes away. So maybe they'll have them pumped up slightly, if I know McLaren, just to make sure that the pressures are now right on this lap. And they could be getting a little bit high by the end of this run.
And of course, Mika Hakkinen doesn't lack courage.
He certainly doesn't lack any courage at all. He's not particularly special in the wet, I found last year. I don't think it's his favourite situation. His favourite situation is flat in 6th gear at some outrageous speed somewhere. But, you know, the car's looking quite good. I thought it looked quite good in Brazil. He looks like he's got a bit of confidence in it. But it's obviously quite tricky out there. He's got the luxury, having done so few laps, to now do 3 or 4 laps, get something in the bag, and then wait until the end. Not every driver's got that situation in front of them.
And you can still see how much standing water remains around the circuit. Although it looks superficially to be better than we had at the start of the session, there are still parts of the circuit where there is deep standing water, and that's where Hakkinen has got to be very careful, because in his, if you like, haste to take advantage of a clear circuit, you could so easily lead yourself into one of those puddles and just sliding off.
6/10 down at the first checkpoint, but Hakkinen will try and make up some of the difference on the second part of the circuit. This, the very tight and twisty section now through the right-hander, climbing uphill through this little sequence of corners, but really they're not able to get up to any high speeds through this part of the circuit. Then up into another tight left, and the little short straight that runs after this, some of the cars were just wheel spinning the whole way along that this morning.
Well, in fact, they were doing it even in the dry. It was really difficult to get grip. If you nailed the throttle very hard coming out onto that short straight, 2nd, 3rd gear, you could hear the wheel spin, and most notably things like the Ferrari, because that engine is so shrill, it just stands out above every other engine here.
Hakkinen's hands are a bit of a blur on this lap. We'll have to wait and see what the time is going to be, and I think everybody in the pit lane is waiting to see what this time is going to be, because it gives them their first indication of just what the track conditions are like after our long delay. So here comes Hakkinen about to cross the line. Well, a 58.412. It's moved him up into 8th place, but I expect to see quite an improvement on that over this next lap.
Aguri Suzuki is now on the circuit at the same time as Mika Hakkinen, and Heinz Harald Frentzen also now deciding that there is Frentzen coming out onto the track. So Frentzen, who's been consistent and very impressive all weekend, will be looking to find a way to improve. Currently 7th place. He's run 5 laps. He will be starting his 6th now. Of course, that's an out lap, and there will be no time, and then his 7th lap will be a serious and no doubt impressive effort from Frentzen.
Schumacher flicking through the video screen to find a picture of himself on the monitor. Now he finds his way through to the times to see that he's still 4th fastest at the moment, behind Damon Hill, but ahead of Jean Alesi. Remember, it's still Gianni Morbidelli in 6th position. Still that great performance in the footwork hard. So we'll have to wait and see whether he can improve on that. And with him having completed 4 laps, he's still got a chance of going even better.
We've now got Andrea Montermini, Johnny Herbert and Ukiyo Katayama. So track times certainly are good enough for those people that have not got a time in the bank to take the risk. So we look at Mika Hakkinen. Again, the intermediate time on the left of your screen. Mika Hakkinen's time on the right. 8/10 slower. That's a small change, but not sufficient for Hakkinen to make any impression on the 2 Jordans.
Eddie Irvine's time, still the time to beat. Remember, still, Rubens Barrichello is second fastest. We haven't really seen any major improvements. Hakkinen has moved himself up the order a little bit during this session. Bit of mud on the side pod there. Looks as though he's skated a little too wide somewhere. And Damon Hill is taking a look at the monitor to see and choose when the correct time. Oh, look at that, Hakkinen just sliding it again through that left-hander onto the start-finish straight. 57.431. That moves him up into 5th position, so it's a gradual climb up the list at the moment. Under 15 minutes to go in this first qualifying session here in Argentina. It's been a session that has been interrupted twice. We've seen 2 red flags. This has got to be one of the longest qualifying sessions that we've seen for some time. But Mika Hakkinen is the man we're watching now. He's currently 5th fastest, trying to chase after that current provisional pole time of Eddie Irvine.
You know, with a new circuit and a track where the teams have had no testing whatsoever before they arrived, it's not surprising that we've got these problems. And of course, with this really unseasonal weather here in Argentina, that's just further compounded the problems that the drivers and teams are facing. It's going to be a long qualifying session. Hopefully, by the time we finally do get to an end, that Saturday will not be a mirror of what we have here. The teams just need some dry track time to come to terms with what kind of car setup they're going to have to look to for Sunday's Grand Prix.
The next checkpoint coming up, Irvine, a 1:26.792. Our next opportunity to see whether Hakkinen is any closer to that. Well, 0.2 of a second down, so definitely a better lap here. Now he's got to get the car through this terribly tight chicane. You can see again the hands, a real blur on the steering wheel as he's tried to sort it out. And they're not really accelerating at all through that corner.
Well, you want a short shift as much as possible through those parts of the circuit. But of course, in your eagerness to try and force the car forward to gain those vital tenths of seconds, you're prepared to give as much throttle as you think you can. Sometimes it's too much, but a very close, just a 1/10 of a second away for Mika Hakkinen. He has now split the 2 Jordan Peugeots, time 1:56.728.
Mika Hakkinen now second fastest as the times are beginning to change, is beginning to make some difference as we go through this session. There you can see the current classification. Hakkinen second, Barrichello still 3rd, Hill still 4th, but remember Hill still has only completed 3 laps.
And Heinz Harald Frentzen, who has improved, he's only 6th place, but he is up to 1:57.536. And more cars there. You can almost see the beginnings, not of a dry line, but of a line appearing, and that's the first time we've really seen that. But again, in that very, very fast exit, you can just see how much water still remains. And this is one of the problems that everybody has to deal with.
David Coulthard has now come out onto the circuit as well as he tries to improve on his current grid position, which is down in 9th place at the moment. Michael Schumacher still in 5th position on the times as we see them. Frentzen just behind him in 6th place.
Well, Mika Hakkinen, this is his 7th lap. He's currently up in 2nd place on the front row of the grid. So Hakkinen hoping to continue that improvement that we've seen. So can he get that vital 1.113 of a second that he needs? He has, he's done it, he's on the provisional pole. Mika Hakkinen, 7 laps completed, provisional pole. Eddie Irvine still in the pits. Rubens Barrichello still in the pits. Damon Hill on the circuit.
Well, it certainly is all hotting up beautifully now with just under 11 minutes in this session remaining. Hakkinen to the top of the pile with Eddie Irvine. Still quite a few laps remaining. Remember, Barrichello's only really got one timed lap that he can still do. And there we're taking a look now at Heinz Harald Frentzen, currently 6th fastest, and he's still got a couple more laps in his armoury before he gets to the maximum 12 laps, when he can no longer do any more times out there. And look at that, Frentzen really sliding the car around now, the car moving everywhere.
Yes, but he's got the confidence with the car. He's able to drive through the car, sliding, no problem. When you are confident, when a car does that, it looks very much worse from the outside as we see it on screen than it would do from within the driver's cockpit, because you are in control. It's when the situation is reversed and it's not so pleasant.
Frentzen coming round on this lap, trying to improve on his current time, 1:57.333, and trying to see whether he can get up into the top 6. Just outside it at the moment in 7th position. Coming out onto the circuit also, just to let you know, is Michael Schumacher, and so has Mika Salo. So at last now Mika Salo will have the opportunity to try and set some quick times, and we would expect to see some quick times coming from the young Finn, the man who impressed so many people in Brazil and who has gone well already this weekend, or this week with the testing and practice as well.
Well, the track's getting busier all the time. Johnny Herbert spin at corner number 1. Well, we haven't seen it, but we've got it here on the Tag Heuer monitors. But in the meantime, Hakkinen still retaining that provisional pole as we go back to Heinz Harald Frentzen, and there you can see the split time. Frentzen with one of the two Minardi Fords ahead of him, and all the way back to David Coulthard. Coulthard drawn in 10th place. Damon Hill, his teammate, and Damon Hill is now the quickest. Damon Hill has snatched the pole away from Mika Hakkinen. 1:56.510, that is 0.032 seconds of an improvement. Damon Hill on his 6th lap and looking for more.
The Williams runner goes to the head of the timesheets. David Coulthard is still down in 9th position at the moment, but he's got quite a lot of improving to do. Mika Salo is just going on to his first time lap, and hopefully he will now begin to set some pace. Now, what about Schumacher? Well, he's currently half a second away from Damon Hill's time as he carries on sliding the car, and now we see whether the reigning world champion is going to be able to re-challenge the new time. But no, it's just gone different again. Jean Alesi sets the fastest time in the Ferrari, and look at the difference there. 1 second, nearly, the difference between Alesi and Hill.
Well, that's just confirming, how good Alesi has been consistently in these conditions, but really how good the Ferrari chassis is. Now, he got the back of the car almost on the lock stop this time. Well, that is exuberance. Jean Alesi, he lifted off clearly, but he didn't think about getting out of it. He just said, I'm quick, I've made an error, I've compounded the error, but I'm still going for it, because this lap could, in spite of those 2 moments, be a further improvement. He knows he's only got 2 laps, this lap and 1 more lap, before his day's work is going to be finished. He's not going to give it up and sacrifice the chance of further extending that.
And off the track there from Gasso in the Pacific Ford. So he's got more problems. He's managed to get back onto the circuit, so that's good news.
Yes, we hear you, Perez.
So Jean Alesi still the fastest with 6/10 advantage. He's 6/10 advantage on his previous best. So Damon Hill still second fastest, then Coulthard third, Hakkinen fourth, Irvine in 5th place, and Barrichello in 6th position. Michael Schumacher is 7th, and then Heinz Harald Frentzen is 8th, with Gerhard Berger 9th, and Gianni Morbidelli in 10th position. But can Alesi improve any more on his current best? A Alesi is in superb form, and is he going to be able to take his second pole of his career?
Well, we've got just over 5 minutes remaining in this session, and Alesi has only got this final lap now in which to try it again, as we see in the part of the circuit. He's clean. He's got to, well, control his emotions there. Andrea Montermini, I think, or Bertrand Gachet, one of the two, and the Pacific Ford being pushed away from the circuit. I doubt we're going to see any more red flags. They will want this session to run to the end. It's almost 5 minutes remaining. All focus on Jean Alesi. Damon Hill is 1.2 seconds behind the flying Frenchman in his Ferrari. David Coulthard up to third. Mika Hakkinen fourth. Irvine and Barrichello fifth and sixth. Gerhard Berger seventh. Schumacher eighth. Frentzen ninth, and Gianni Morbidelli a great 10th.
Just under 5 minutes to go now, and we're watching Damon Hill. Can he come back to Jean Alesi? Alesi still with that advantage of 1.2 seconds. Coulthard still with that third fastest time, and the pit crew is now really watching closely to see what the outcome of these last few minutes is going to be. Alesi's 55.264, still the fastest, but Heinz Harald Frentzen has now gone second fastest, and Michael Schumacher has an enormous spin as he comes on to start finish straight. He laughs at just coming across the line. He gathered it up. One of the most impressive bits of driving anybody's going to see here this afternoon, and so far we haven't seen it on screen, but just out of the corner of our eye, we saw Michael Schumacher perform a pirouette that probably was in the region of 100 miles an hour. Very high marks for style, and for originality, 10 out of 10. Well, Schumacher's only 9th fastest at the moment, so he's got to find something somewhere, and he was obviously trying to go on to a fast lap as he came across the start-finish line, and then threw it away with a spin, so he's now going to have to try again in his last remaining laps. He's completed 9 out of the 12 now. So there's the current order. Alesi, Frentzen, Hill, Coulthard, Hakkinen and Irvine with the next 6 cars, as you can see on the list. And look at Michael Schumacher down there, 9th fastest at the moment. Well, Alesi has just about finished his total number of laps, but Schumacher still has a few more. The final few moments of this first qualifying session from Argentina. See the Ferrari of Jean Alesi at the head of the list, but look at this lap that's coming from David Coulthard. Coulthard is on a quick one, there's no doubt about it. He's up on the slip time, but he's got traffic.
And the traffic is not a problem. It's going into the pits. The Sauber did not get in the way of David Coulthard, and as Coulthard timed this to perfection, there's 2 minutes and 44 seconds remaining, and we've got cars sliding off all over the place. That looks again like Michael Schumacher has made a second mistake in the lap, and David Coulthard, the first man into the 1 minute 54-second bracket, has claimed provisional pole. And look, conditions you can see still appalling.
We've got a lot of cars out there at the moment, and the problem of traffic as well could become very, very serious in these last couple of minutes. Alesi second, Frentzen third. Hill is 4th fastest. He's still got a few more laps that he can do, but Coulthard also has a couple more laps in his armoury.
Well, that is really a function of a great drive by David Coulthard, but just track conditions are by the second. Look, back rear of the car, almost up off of the curb. Again, another example of a young man who is showing confidence. Schumacher, I mean, he seems to have lost his composure. That's 2 errors, big errors he's made on that lap. He tried to go past the Sauber. Really no way under those conditions. He was frustrated. He is desperate to take advantage of the conditions, the improving conditions. And now Coulthard coming up to the completion of his 10th lap. Once again, Sauber's in the way, Simtek in the way, but getting well over to the left. For Coulthard, he's got to try and find further improvement on his second intermediate time, 1 minute 25.056. And again, a footwork stopped at a part of the circuit. We saw that second stoppage.
Well, Coulthard is only a fraction slower than the last one. The current order is David Coulthard, Jean Alesi, Heinz Harald Frentzen, then Damon Hill and Gerhard Berger with Mika Hakkinen 6 fastest. Then it's the 2 Jordans, Eddie Irvine and Rubin Barrichello. There's under 1 minute to go. We've got only 50 seconds of this session to go, and it's Coulthard going to claim his first ever pole position. Across the line he goes.
And coming across the line there, Rev soared as the back end of the car broke away, and again the red flag is out on the circuit. But with some 35 seconds remaining, this session is effectively abandoned or over. And again, because of these treacherous conditions, all you have to do is get one wheel on the wrong part of the circuit, and that's it. So why is the session, with 35 seconds remaining, brought to a stop? And I don't think anybody will argue about those remaining 35 seconds, but undoubtedly some teams will. But of course, there would be no way anybody would be able to take advantage. And that man, Michael Schumacher, must be very disappointed indeed, all the way down in 10th or 9th place, 1 place ahead of his teammate, and a fine effort from Johnny Herbert, who really has had a very much of a mixed day here in Buenos Aires.
So the position after first qualifying, a provisional grid, of course in wet conditions, which could be worse tomorrow. The forecast is not great for tomorrow. So could we see David Coulthard take his first ever pole? He's got the provisional pole after the first session. Alesi second fastest for the Ferrari. Heinz Harald Frentzen in a much better performance from Sauber with the 3rd fastest. Damon Hill 4th. Then Gerhard Berger in 5th. Then it's Hakkinen 6th. Irvine, Barrichello, Schumacher down in that 9th place. Then Johnny Herbert rounding out the top 10. There you can see positions 11 through to 20, and we're going to be back tomorrow with the second qualifying session live here on Eurosport. I hope you can join Ben Edwards and John Watson for that. See you then.